All righty, my friends. Good to see you. I am here. I am Tad. I will be Tad for at least the next hour. That's the plan, anyway. Hope you are well. It is 7 p.m. here in semi sunny California. No complaints. Nice day today. Good day. A lot of dog work, but all with good result. I will get into that in a moment, since that seems to be the kind of center of our lives at the moment, but no complaints, as I said. I will be reading from Dirty Streets of Heaven in just a few minutes, and at that point, I will be reading for the rest of the hour, pretty much. So that's what's going on. So we, those of you who have not checked in since last week, yes, we are still integrating dogs, or integrating dog. We already had dog, and now we're integrating other dog. And of course, it is a complicated process, especially when one of those dogs is very nervous. But things seem to be going well. And we had a trainer in today, and she was really good. And so we feel like, yeah, we're doing generally the right kind of stuff. We need to make a few adjustments here and there, just some small stuff, and be a little more rigorous on certain kinds of things. But generally, it's all good. So we are moving toward a dog integration, and toward integrated doggage, which will be a huge thing. And actually, for only about the second time in the last 20-something nights, we are going to have everybody in the bedroom tonight, with one of the dogs in a crate. You can guess which one, the new one. And, which will be fun. We can actually, watch a program together or something. So that's basically it. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail because it's all dog detail and not really that interesting. I am also, as I mentioned during last night's reading, I am pounding away at The Splintered Sun, and generally didn't get any work time in today except for a little bit of thinking time, but generally feeling like I'm just getting a handle on that, and I'm beginning to make sense out of the shape of the whole thing. And I'm approaching 500 pages in the manuscript, which for me is kind of like clearing my throat, but obviously I'm not intending to write that long a book. This is not the final volume of a 4-book trilogy. This is just a book that's going to stand on its own, and if people like it, then I will write other books with these characters in this setting because I like it. But I cannot force anybody else to enjoy what I'm doing, so I have to try and at least be somewhat commercial, somewhat responsive to reader wishes, which is not a complaint, by the way. I am very happy to be engaged in this process, and I think I've said it several times, but if I haven't said it lately, I will say it again, which is that I am not the kind of creator who would continue to do this even without an audience. Meaning write books. Because although this stuff does have to come out of me, in the sense that that's basically what I am. I'm a natural storyteller, or at least I'm inclined towards storytelling. But more importantly, for me, telling a story is engaging with an audience, readers, or if you're on stage, an actual audience, or if you're playing music, the people who listen to your music, whatever it is. For me, that's an important part. And it's even more important with fiction, especially fantasy and science fiction and horror. Anything where you are creating things that people don't come into contact with in the ordinary world. You really need the reader participation. You need the reader first to trust you, then to imagine with you. And if you give them enough without giving them too much description of things, they will fill in the gaps in a way that work best for them. So if you're trying to create beauty, then they will influence what feels with what feels beautiful to them. And if you don't over-describe things, in other words, if you don't get obsessively detail-oriented, they will fill in the gaps. They meaning you, meaning us, meaning all of us when we are readers. And similarly, if you're writing things that are scary, a thing I've quoted a lot which I refer to as Stephen King's 6-foot insect dictum. That's Dictum. Don't be nasty. Anyway, Stephen King's 6-foot insect dictum, which is one that I believe in very strongly, is he starts out, this was in, I think, his Danse Macabre, which is a book about horror fiction in general, and him talking about what works for him and what doesn't. And one of the things he talks about is sets up an imaginary situation where, you are the main character, or, you are participating in the vicariously with the main character, and something is outside the door. You're in a room, something is outside the door, and you don't know what it is, but you know it's bad. You know it's bad. You know it's scary. And when you open the door, it's an insect the size of a human, a 6-foot insect. And yes, that is scary and gross and upsetting and all of those things. But there's a part of your mind that before that door opens, that the reader, you as the reader, or us as readers, we are thinking of all the possibilities of what might be on the other side of that door. And we are thinking like, it could be anything. It could be a shambling zombie thing. It could be a mysterious swamp ghost dripping, or it could, And even if you're thinking insect, giant insect, you could be thinking it's a 60-foot tall insect outside waiting to get me. So as soon as you open that door and you reveal what it is, and the more detail you reveal, the more this process takes place. The reader is both upset by whatever the thing is, but they are also relieved to some level that it wasn't all the things that they thought it could have been, which would have been worse. So in this vein, and I had known this even before I read the book, just because, as I said, I'm a storyteller by nature, and I knew that as soon as you give people too much definition, you are undercutting the mysteriousness and, in this case of things that are frightening, the scariness of something. So I'm a big believer in that. And I mean, just with the Bobby Dollar book, if you'll notice it, it's not until very late in this novel that we're reading that we get more than just a real basic glimpse of the thing that's following Bobby, the Galu, which, by the way, if you haven't read the book or haven't read it lately, it's spelled Ghallu, and it is based on an actual Sumerian demon. But, I deliberately did not put too much detail in. It's big, it's hot, it's angry, it has horns, and at one point Bobby says it seemed to have like a beard or some growth off its face. And that's about as much as you're going to hear. And near the end farther into the novel, you'll hear a little tiny bit more, but not much. And the reason is because, again, I don't want to make it a 6-foot insect. So that's important. I want people to fill it in their own minds, because every reader is different, and the reader can more efficiently find what scares them, charms them, fills them with wonder, whatever the case may be. And along these lines, before, and I may have told this story too, and this is one of the problems with having done this for 5 years now. I've said so many things more than once. But when the Lord of the Rings movies were first coming out, whatever year that was, 2000 something, I was going to go see it and figured I would probably enjoy it, but I also was determined to reread the Lord of the Rings, which I used to read like once a year, all through my teenage years and many of my early 20s years. But I hadn't read for quite a few at that point. And I hadn't read it through again for a while. But I said, I want to lock in whatever has been in my mind all my life with the Lord of the Rings, which was super important to me when I was like 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. So I went back and reread the Lord of the Rings carefully again, and seeing what was in my mind, what pictures it had generated in me that I had always just relied on all my life, these images that I had in my head every time I reread The Lord of the Rings. And one of the things that I realized is that a lot of what was very straightforwardly English type landscapes, which of course Tolkien was very, very fond of, enamored with even, and with which he was very familiar, and really worked to describe. Well, all the landscapes in my mind from The Lord of the Rings were, in fact, had nothing to do with England because I had never been to England at that time. I realized that almost all the landscapes that were in my mind were based on car trips around California that we had taken when I was a kid. And that even things like the Barrow Downs, which in rereading and retrospect, I go, oh, okay, I know what Barrow Downs are now because I have studied many of these things, and I know about tumuli and barrows in general, and all this kind of stuff. I know a lot about now, but at the time I didn't. So when I read Barrow Downs as an 11 or 12-year-old, what I saw in my mind's eye were the kind of granite outcroppings, the kind of bits of broken granite outcroppings that you would sometimes see on grassy hillsides up in the mountains, up in the Sierra Nevadas, where my family went a lot when I was young. So I had this realization suddenly that almost everything that was in The Lord of the Rings for me was based on things that I already knew. So I was clearly substituting things that I had in my memory. And as I went through the book, I discovered that lots of things I had just these very vague pictures in my head, which were nevertheless very firmly fixed. But I got to Lothlorien, and I realized there was all this stuff happened in Lothlorien that I had read many times, but I had never adjusted my mental picture. So I really only, is it Caras Galadon, I believe, is the main place where Galadriel and Celeborn live. And so I had my version of Caras Galadon in my mind, but the rest of it, because they're in several different parts of Lothlorien, I had never formed a particular mental picture for. So it was really interesting to me to discover this, but it just confirmed me in the 6-foot insect dictum, which is that it is crucial that the reader has a major involvement in picturing what is happening, especially if it's something out of the ordinary, if it's something meant to shock or delight that the reader would not have seen on their own or not seen exactly. You want them to participate. So anyway, sorry, didn't mean to get off on a long tangent, but that's something that I think about a lot. So now you have to think about it too. Anyway, let us see who all has showed up here. I see Mark says he's loving the pup dates, which are starting to sound like the incredible journey with less Canadian wilderness and more treats. Certainly today, boy, I'll tell you, the lovely trainer, Joy, who came over today, when we were doing some stuff with them, Joy was very open-handed with the treats. It made me feel like Ebenezer Scrooge, I'll tell you. She must have given them 20 or 30 of little treats, whereas we tend to kind of dole them out 2 or 3 or 4 per hour or so. But she was working on them to get a specific kind of reaction. So she was, handing them out, going, look at me, et cetera, et cetera. When they looked, they'd get a treat, and then she'd toss one and say, find it, and that was a way to break concentration, and because you don't want the dogs to get into a staring contest with each other. All kinds of interesting things. But anyway, yes, so definitely more treats. Who else is here? Angie. Hello, Angie. Good to see you. I am definitely going to be reading in just a couple minutes once I say hello to everybody. So I'm sorry you've had an anxious week. I completely get it. And we will be reading soon. Barban, hello. Good to see you. Tim Speckens, greetings. Pleasure to have you. Isaac, good as always to see you too. Chris Fab, guten Tag. Guten Tag, mein Freunde. Are there more infos about time and place of your Denmark trip you mentioned last week? The last I heard, I will post things about this when I know. The last I heard, it was probably going to be in September, I believe. But I will let you know more about that as well when I can. Jeremy, hello, buddy. Good. I got your email. Thank you very much. I replied to that, and I very much appreciate your help with this. So thank you. Mark, hello, buddy. Good to see you. This is Mark Gamble. And a pleasure to have you with me as always. I was talking about Cindy last night because I was wearing my Nornporn shirt. And so, of course, not just thinking of Cindy, but thinking of you too. So lovely to see you. Tracy, hello. Good to see you. And let me see who else. Susan Shamblin, greetings, greetings. Good to see you. Nigel Renee, or not? Yeah, I'm assuming that's how it's pronounced. Please tell me if you want me to correct a pronunciation. It looks like Nigel, spelled in an interesting idiosyncratic way. Nigel says, got my new hard copies of this series. Couldn't find my paperbacks. Well, I don't think you will ever disappoint or upset a writer by telling them that you picked up extra copies of their books. On the other hand, I hate to see people spend money they don't have to. So do remember there are libraries, and I'm a big supporter of libraries. Palo Alto libraries were my homes when I was growing up. Many important things happened for me in the Palo Alto library system. So Mark Marino, hello Mark. Welcome aboard. Nice to see you. I don't think I've seen your name before, but you are very welcome, and thanks for dropping in. Christy, hello. Good evening to you. Cliff, hi. Yes, we're all doing well here, and I'm glad to hear that you guys are doing well at your place too. Excellent. Chris Van Dahl, hello Chris. Good to see you. I just liked something of yours on Facebook today. One of your pictures of you in the striped Stevens suit. Very, very cool. Yes, Cliff, exactly. Cliff says what was so scary about the Balrog is how vague the description is. Exactly. And while the Balrog in the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings was very impressive, I could have done with even less detail. I would have been fine with that, because what is scary is what we put into it, not just what is put in front of us. So yes, absolutely. Emily, hello. Slightly distracted, but glad you're here anyway. There are worse places to be distracted. Jeremy says he kind of imagined the Galu from the book we're reading looking like Sully from Monsters, Inc. Blue, furry. Okay, I'll take that. Hi, Kristen. Good to see you. Pleasure. Ray Weatherford. Hi, Ray. Good to see you. Greetings. Welcome. Let me see who else we got. Have I said hello to everybody? I think I've said hello to everybody. Oh, Isaac. Okay, good. We will get you on the newsletter list. Actually, the best thing to do is to send an address to Deborah via one of her email addresses, because she is primarily the keeper of the information, because there's only so much I can fit into this minuscule little brain of mine. So, Angie says, I have to get all of my books from libraries these days. Well, there are worse places to go, especially in times of stress. Libraries, I love libraries. When I was younger, I'm just about to read, don't worry, but when I was younger, I had an idea that the job I wanted, the job that, they always say, don't apply for the job you need. I don't remember what that saying is. But anyway, when I was younger, like a teenager, and once I decided that archaeology was too much work, and I hadn't yet settled on rock and roll as a career, which didn't work out either. But the job that I really thought would be perfect for me was what I called theoretical librarian. And my idea about being a theoretical librarian is that I would be in the library, where I would have a desk somewhere in the back, and I would sit there, and people would come in and say, if a plesiosaur had a fight with a blue whale, who would win? And I would go, well, that's an interesting question, and here's a few places you could look, and here's my suggestion as to some possibilities you should consider. And I wouldn't tell people what I thought the answer was so much as that I would point them in directions. I would, tell them, I've heard this or that, and what I do know is that a plesiosaur weighs this much and a blue whale weighs this much, and blue whales are filter feeders, so they are not likely to attack. But on the other hand, that kind of thing. So I wanted to be a theoretical librarian and just sit around all day answering interesting questions and guiding people in good directions. And in fact, I think that's kind of a bit of what happens in my fiction, because a lot of the fiction I have enjoyed the most has sent me off in interesting directions, either to look up things myself. For instance, speaking of Stephen King earlier, in Salem's Lot, one of his sections of the book is called The Emperor of Ice Cream, and it leads off with a staggering poem by Wallace Stevens called The Emperor of Ice Cream. The only emperor is the Emperor of Ice Cream. It's about death. And I thought, wow, I know so little about poetry. I have to find out about that particular poet, and went and bought, a used copy of a Wallace Stevens collection, and he became one of my favorite poets. So in my own humble way, I have also tried to do this with books over the years, with my books. Put interesting details in there that hopefully will make people say, and poetry sometimes and other things, that hopefully will send people to say, hey, that's interesting. I want to find out more about that. So anyway, that is a positive effect of many of my favorite writers that I wanted to recapitulate. Anyway, I have babbled for a long time now, longer than usual, so I'm going to start reading. So, let's see, where did it go? Here it is. Okay, so at this point in time, Bobby has just heard that the African gentleman who was visiting the late Edward Walker, the man who died of suicide and whose soul disappeared, and that Bobby has heard that from the people who live there, his granddaughter and her boyfriend, that this guy came back to visit, and it happened to coincide with where Bobby had seen something in one of his photos that he wanted, and it's gone. So Bobby has zipped over to the house, and then somewhere along the line, not able to find this particular thing about the Magian Society, which he was very intrigued by and wants badly. But Bobby has been told offhandedly by Posey, the granddaughter, that they once had a card from this guy. And that's what's going on, is that he sent her off to get a card. So we will just start there. 2 minutes later, after a great deal of rummaging noises and mumbled curses, Posey Walker reappeared in triumph, waving a white cardboard rectangle. Found it! I tried not to look too eager as I reached out for it. G-Man was watching me with a kind of hero-worshipping attention that I knew was going to cause trouble somewhere up the line. The card itself was simple, just a few lines in the same neat black italics as the folder I'd photographed. The Reverend Dr. Moses Habari, the Magian Society, 4442 East Charleston Road, Suite D, San Judas, California 94043. There was a phone number, too, which I immediately dialed. No longer in service, of course. How long ago did you say he left? About half an hour, Garcia informed me. You gonna go after him? Can I tag? Oh, crap. Hang on, sorry, I just lost my page. Can I tag? I briefly considered telling him my real feelings, but decided I might need something from him or Posey later on. No, I need you to stay here in case he gets in touch again. And if he does, please don't do anything weird. I gave him my sternest look. Just call me, understand? Discreetly. Under control, Mr. Dollar. He all but saluted. A couple of days ago, he had been waving a gun in my face. Now this dumbass was ready to follow me around like a baby duck. I don't know. Sometimes I think I'm an idiot magnet. I was back on the Bay Shore a few minutes later, this time heading towards Southport. I knew East Charleston Road fairly well because it wasn't that far from where Sam lived, a neighborhood that had fallen on tough times twice. First in the 70s, when the cargo handling industry took a hit from competition across the bay, then again 20 years later when Shoreline Amusement Park closed for good. What remained were little business parks, storage lockers, and party supply warehouses, as well as a few apartment buildings and stores catering to a local population of retired longshoremen, general rummies, and of course the occasional angel. As I made my way down Charleston toward the bay, I could see the skeletal remains of Shoreline Park off to my right, the great fretwork arch of the whirl-away coaster draped across the face of the waxing moon like a spider web. People were always coming up with new projects that were going to turn the little man-made island back into a dynamo of the local economy. Hotels, office complexes, even one planned for a mid-bay golf course. But somehow they all came to nothing, and the abandoned amusement park just kept getting rustier and more decrepit. Nowadays, it mainly got used as a location for low-budget zombie apocalypse movies. 4442 East Charleston was pretty much what I'd figured it would be. One of those single-story warehouse condos for small wholesalers and light retail, the business equivalent of the island of misfit toys. Suite D was empty and shuttered, also as I expected. I should have brought my break-in tools. Again, none of your business. But they were in one of the packing boxes from my apartment, and I hadn't had time to find them. Anyway, it was impossible to tell from outside when anyone had last occupied the office suite, but just for due diligence, I knocked loudly several times. No response from the Magian Society folks, but a disheveled guy with several days' growth of beard finally came out of the C space next door and asked me who I was looking for. I wondered if his wife had kicked him out and he'd moved into his shop, which turned out to be true. He ran a little grinding business, specializing in the sharpening of some kind of exotic industrial cutting blades, and was quite willing to talk. A little too willing. He told me within the first minute that he'd never seen the tenants of Suite D, had no idea what they did or sold, and had often wondered if anyone was using the space at all. But it took me another 10 minutes to get away from him, and I had to admire some of his machinery and reject several offers of a beer first. All the way back across the city to my motel, I rolled the newest bits around in my mind. I had confirmation of a connection between the African gentleman and the Magian Society, and I had a name for him, or at least a pseudonym. Also, judging by how quickly he'd scuttled over to cover his tracks at the Walker place, I was pretty sure that he knew I was looking for him. I had got the name of the landlord for the Charleston address from the grinder guy and decided that might be a place to start tomorrow if luck kept the local deaths down to a minimum so I had some free time. Of course, no sooner did I think this than the phone rang, summoning me to a heart attack in a Spanish Town apartment building. The deceased, who seemed to be the beloved patriarch of a large Honduran-American family, eventually turned out to be a nasty old bastard who defeated my best efforts to paint him as a product of his culture and era. He hadn't actually killed or raped anyone, but his record was poor, and I was lucky to get him off with about 1,000 years in purgatory. I couldn't help hoping it would do him some good, because even as his soul stood looking at his own corpse and his dry-eyed family, he was complaining that he deserved better. He was still bitching when the light took him. Anyway, it was a nasty grind, and by the time I stepped out of the zipper and back into real-world Spanish Town, it was nearly 2 a.m. Time continues to pass inside while you're outside, if I didn't already mention that, although not always exactly at the same rate. Anyway, all I wanted to do was get back to my motel, pour a drink, and call Fatback, who would have cycled to Man Brain and Pig Body by now, then fall into bed. But I was also on edge due to recent events, so when I heard a noise at the other end of the client's apartment garage, I stopped in my tracks and yanked out my .38. Yes, my pulse was elevated. You damn betcha. "Just to let you know, whoever you are," I announced loudly, "I'm tired, nervous, and armed. Let's avoid a serious mistake, shall we? Come out where I can see you." The figure that stepped out of the shadows was so big that for a freaky moment I feared the worst, but I quickly saw this shape was far more human than the galoo that had chased me. With some relief, I recognized my old friend, the Countess's bodyguard #1. "I wish we had some more time, Dollar," he said. "I'd love to see you try to stop me with that pop gun before I folded you up like a napkin." "Yeah, it's a shame we don't have time to try that, you big cutie," I said. "Seriously, if you want to waltz around, come back when I'm not so tired, and we'll do it properly. Because right now, I want to go to bed so bad that I'll just put a few slugs in your skull, which will at least keep you out of my hair long enough for me to get some shut-eye." "You talk big, Halo boy." "Look, what do you want?" I wasn't kidding. I really was willing to shoot him just to get into bed sooner. "Somebody wants to talk to you. She's waiting." My heart sped. It couldn't be good to have an archdemon looking for you in the middle of the night, but for some reason I still found it exciting in a sick kind of way. All right. One thing though, Carob? Wait, Coco, was it? He wasn't amused. It's Candy. Oh, sorry, right. I just wanted to know, where's your buddy with the porn stash? Cinnamon? He's driving the car. I hope so. Because please notice where I'm holding my gun. If someone suddenly appears out of the bushes, I'm going to blow your dick off on general principles. Fortunately for Candy, he was telling the truth. As we emerged from the apartment building garage, I saw a long car with black windows idling under a streetlight. The driver's window was open, and Cinnamon was sitting there in all his cookie-dustered glory. He sneered at me as Candy opened the back door and gestured for me to get in. I didn't like turning my back on Candy. Didn't like it at all. So I shoved my gun against his belly as I leaned down to look inside. The Countess gazed back at me. Her eyes were big as a doe's under the dome light, but none of Bambi's relations ever had a gleam like that. Satisfied that at least Candy and Cinnamon weren't on some kind of freelance revenge trip, I slid in. The door thumped shut behind me, making my ears pop. Hiya, Countess, I said. Or does following me around at this time of the night mean we're good enough friends that I can start calling you I didn't finish my sentence because she slapped me so hard it nearly dislocated my jaw. I stared at her for a moment, stunned. Hang on, I began. Then she smacked me again, and this time I felt her nails dig into my cheek like fishhooks. When little lights stopped flashing in front of my eyes, I reached up and dabbed at the wetness I felt there. Yep, blood. What the hell was that for? I asked. I knew you were self-absorbed and self-satisfied, Mr. Dollar. The dome light was still on. She was showing a little color high on her cheek, something I hadn't seen before. You'll probably think me hopelessly shallow when I confess that I liked it, despite the pain I'd had to endure to see it. What I didn't realize is that you were also suicidal. I have no idea what you're talking about, I said. Oh, I think you do. On the contrary, and I feel like I know less and less every second. What was with this woman? No, this demon, I reminded myself. I couldn't figure her out at all. Most of the denizens of hell I meet make it very clear that they wish they could immediately start killing you in a complex, painful way, and are only prevented from doing so by the Tartarian Convention. But I couldn't figure out what the Countess wanted at all. Why don't you ask me some questions next time before you start hurting me? You think that hurt? Believe me, if I ever decide to inflict pain on you, Dollar, you'll know. Look, just tell me what's going on. Bodyguard 2 had just climbed out from behind the wheel to share a smoke with Bodyguard 1 under the streetlight, so we were alone in the car. Is this something to do with that Foxy character? The little Japanese freak. She leaned back in the seat. She was wearing a black dress, very short, and showing a lot of long, smooth leg. I dragged my attention back up to her face. It's not real, Bobby, I reminded myself. Strip away the illusion, and she probably looks like some kind of giant slug. No, she said. This is about you, Angel. Word is all over the street that you've got hold of something big. And I'm not talking about the street you can see from your cruddy little apartment. Ah, you've seen it then? I'm planning to redecorate. You know, ferns, Scandinavian modern furniture, and natural woods. But shut up. I'm talking about the word on the Via Dolorosa, which was one name for the main drag of Pandemonium, the capital of hell, that you've got hold of something important and you're looking for a buyer. A once-in-an-epoch piece of merchandise. But I don't. Shut up! And they're also whispering all over Dispeter Square and the rest of the city that you got this something important from me. Which means on top of everything else, I have Chancellor Urgulap and his investigation, poking into all my affairs, making my life miserable. I am not happy. That stopped me dead for a second. I looked at her and for the first time saw not an impossibly beautiful temptress or an evil spirit in disguise, but somebody who might just be as worried about the current state of play as I was. And I sure didn't envy anybody who had that horrible melted giant bug I'd met at Walker's place breathing down her neck. "Okay, lady," I said, "you've had your say, now listen to mine." I held my hand up to forestall an interruption, and to my amazement, it worked. "I don't know anything about any special something except that a dancing albino Asian asked me today if I wanted to sell it. And you seem to think I've been bragging that I have it, but like I said, I don't even know what I'm supposed to have. And if I've got it, I'm not aware of it. Hang on, I'm not done." I raised my hand again when she started to speak, but instead of slapping her, as she'd done to me, I reached forward and gently touched my finger to her red, red lips. I don't know exactly why I did it, I just did. She knocked my hand aside, but in a strange, uncaring way, quite different from the way she'd slugged me just a minute earlier. "Right," I said. "Now, here's the next part. You remember the scorch mark I showed you? The handprint something burned into my door? Well, now I've seen that something up close and in person. In fact, it tried to kill me last night and nearly succeeded. When you saw that picture, I could tell it meant something to you. You've seen something like it before, haven't you? So, instead of busting my chops again, why don't you show a little good faith and tell me what you know for a change? Something's got you upset, Countess. Let's see if we can do each other some good. Is all this craziness about the Walker case?" She stared at me for a long time, and all of a sudden the inspiration that had carried me along deserted me. What did I think I was doing here? I couldn't trust this tarted-up hellbitch, even if she decided to trust me, and she would never trust me. Not to mention what would happen if my bosses found out I was sitting in a car in the middle of the night volunteering to share information with the Countess of Cold Hands, one of hell's fixers. The next summons I got would be to a heavenly court-martial, if they didn't just incinerate me without a trial. This kind of shit just wasn't done without archangelic supervision, and I had already been warned to stay on the straight and narrow. But things had started moving too fast for me, and I was tired of playing blind man's bluff, weary of trying to figure out the shape of what was going on by feel alone. It's not all about the Walker case," she said slowly, "but Walker has got my masters shaken up." "Really? It's not just something they've done to drive heaven crazy?" She shook her head. "Doesn't seem to be. As far as I can tell, they're really worried. And there have been more souls lost since that happened." I felt a little chime of reassurance. I knew I was probably crazy for even entertaining the possibility, but maybe she really was being straight with me, or as straight as she knew. "I've heard that too, but if both sides are freaking out, where did Walker go? Where did any of them go?" She pulled a compact from her purse and gave herself a quick once-over in the mirror. "Don't know," she said, "and to be honest, I don't care, even though I've been questioned about it non-stop ever since it happened. I've got enough problems of my own." "Like what?" Her eyes flashed, and I'm not saying that poetically. Something sparked red in the depths. "None of your fucking business, Dollar." "Okay, fair enough, but what about the thing that burned the crap out of my apartment door?" "It's a galoo," she said, sounding like an English home county schoolgirl reciting what she'd learned in a particularly dreary class. "A living piece of old night, which is another word for chaos in case you crashed and burned your afterlife exams. Expensive to summon, nearly impossible to stop. And yes, I've seen that mark before." Where? And who sent it after me? The answer to the first is, again, none of your business, Dollar. As to the second, I don't know, but it's bad news. If you really don't know what's going on with any of this, I strongly suggest you get out of the way, as far away and for as long as possible. No good can come of it. Now it was my turn to stare. For the first time since the conversation started, I didn't believe what she was saying, at least the part about not knowing who sent the galoo. Still, she had been amazingly open, so I decided not to push my luck. Well, not too much. Okay then, Countess. One more question, I guess, only one. What about us? Her eyes opened wide. What? But she sounded more surprised than angry. What's that supposed to mean, Angel? We're helping each other, right? Well, what if I found out something you should know? I'm not just going to hang around the water hole on the off chance you'll wander in to pick up a couple of pre-meds to go. Is that really what we're doing? She was definitely amused in a kind of biting something sour way. Helping each other. As far as I can see, the only person helping anyone is me. What could you possibly do for me in return? Let's not rush things. Just in case it comes up. How do I get in touch? She laughed, suddenly and with apparent sincerity. You really are a piece of work, Bobby Dollar. You have a very high estimation of your own importance. Beg your pardon, sister, but it's your car I'm sitting in, not the other way around. You wanted to talk to me and knock me around a bit. My jaw was still sore. Very well. She pulled a business card from her purse, wrote something on it with a very nice fountain pen. Call this in an emergency. Leave a message. I'll get hold of you. Thank you, Countess. I still wasn't quite sure what I had got into, but it was definitely something unusual. Suddenly a smile, tight and secretive. Oh, I think you can call me Kaz now, she said, until you get yourself killed anyway. Sleep tight. Which was definitely a dismissal. I slid toward the door, then paused. I've been meaning to ask you, where does your name come from? Kazimira? It's Polish. No, your other name, the Countess of Cold Hands. She leaned forward and cupped my face in her slender fingers. The skin was as icy as a fish's belly. You know what they say, she said, and a strange, sad expression crossed her face. Cold hands, cold heart. The door opened behind me as if by magic, but it was only Big Candy who helped me out, none too gently. Good night, boys, I called as he and his plug-ugly pal climbed back into the black car. Dream of me. The long, low car with black windows rolled silently away, and I stumbled toward my car and the drive back to my motel. Chapter 13, Leviathan on a Hook. As late as I got to bed, as tired, scared, and pissed off as I was, you'd have thought that just this once the universe might cut me some slack. You'd have been wrong. My phone rang again at 5:30 in the morning, and although I ignored it, kept ringing every 2 minutes until I gave up and rolled onto the floor, then crawled across the unfamiliar motel room on my hands and knees to answer it. It wasn't a heaven-related number, so I was even more certain it wouldn't be anything worth waking up for. Who wants to die? It's me, Bobby? The pig man. It's really, really goddamned early, George, in case you didn't notice. Nobody knows that better than me. You want to talk about the time I got about 10 minutes left until the sun's up, and then all you're going to get is oink, oink, oink. Sorry, George. Go ahead. Okay, first there's Kephas. It's ancient Aramaic, and it means rock. It's what Jesus actually named Peter. You know, you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. There's tons of mentions on various Bible sites, but only in that context.
I haven't found anything interesting or out of the ordinary about Magians yet. But you're hot as a pistol, Mr. D. A lot of people want to know about you. According to my sources, secondary queries with your name in them have tripled in the last few days.
What are secondary queries? That's someone other than me asking the questions. Helplessness tugged at me, the leading edge of panic, and I did my best to slap it away. Why me, George? What is it that everyone wants to know? And who's asking? As to who, it's mostly folks who operate on the edges between the two sides. Information users, mostly. I can't figure out yet what's got people so interested, except that some folks have been talking about you and others want to know why. There's a lot of stuff all over .ky. It was too damn early. .ky? I'm big news on a sexual lubricant site? No, that's just the domain name. It means Cayman Islands. A lot of the paranormal folk use their internet domain because the accounts can't be traced. Anyway, my business is all about information chasing its own tail, but it's even harder than usual to get hold of anything substantial on this. I'm chasing a rumor without knowing what the rumor is, see? But I promise I'll let you know as soon as I have anything specific. Thanks, George. You're a good man. Anything on the monstrosity that's after me? Tall, dark, and horny? Oh, shit, yeah. Of course, I'm really sorry you have to deal with that crap, Bobby. Yeah, George, I am too. I appreciated him, but I wasn't at my most patient. Any helpful details? Again, not very much. They're not common. Alu or Galu is the closest match I can find. Yeah, I've got confirmation on that already. Some kind of hireling spirit. Very old, pre-Christian. Yeah, and it's bad news. I knew that too. The problem is they don't show up very often, so nobody's got much real information more recent than the 19th century. Only somebody with a lot of clout can put one of those babies to work. Damn it, George, I already heard all this. I need to know what to do about it. How do you kill one, or at least dismiss it? I don't know, Bobby. The last confirmed sighting was back in the 1980s in Syria. Well, I confirmed one trying to set my ass on fire as it chased me down the Camino Real a couple of nights ago, so I think I need a better answer than that. There was a long pause. When he spoke again, something strange had happened to his voice. I'm... George? You okay? He was reduced to grunting now. I peered at my window and saw a gray gleam between the curtains. Daybreak. The next grunt had a little squeal in it. I guess the last human part of him didn't like letting go. Well, thanks for calling, George. I hung up and crawled back into bed, which seemed like as good a place to die as any other. Just to make sure I didn't get too much sleep, Alice sent me a client at about 8 o'clock. I had to scramble out of the motel without breakfast and hurry down to Sequoia Hospital, where I at least had the luck to represent a lovely elderly lady who had spent most of her life going to church and taking care of her family and also most of her neighborhood, like Mother Teresa, without the lust for publicity. Seeing her go peacefully and happily into the light reminded me that a lot of what I do is to make sure good people get the reward they deserve. When I was done, it was almost lunchtime. I hadn't been to the Compasses for a couple of days, and I was feeling nostalgic, so I called the place. Chico set the phone out on the bar and made it a conference call with the members of the choir who were there. Walter Sanders, Sweetheart, Young Elvis, and a few others. No Monica, no Sam. What's happening, Bobby? Cool Filter asked. He had a voice like Louis Armstrong trying not to cough, and he almost always sounded amused. Heard some ugly old shit is chasing you around. Nothing I can't handle, which was an outright lie, but I hate people feeling sorry for me like a cat hates bathwater. Seen Sam?
"He was in last night," reported young Elvis. He got that name because of his hair, by the way. I have never seen any living human being spend as much time fucking with his hair as this angel does. There's a permanent solidified mist of hairspray on the Compass's bathroom mirror because of him. It's a pretty spectacular do, though, I have to admit. Like the king in his leather-jacketed prime. Our boy likes to wear that rockabilly shit, too. Spanish heels, the works. Hey, do any of you happen to know where I can find the Solihull sisters these days? Cool chortled. "Sit, you are a glutton for punishment, B. I think somebody said they were haunting some diner across town." "Superior Grill off the 84, Walter Sanders said in his sniffy way. "At least they were there a week ago. Ruined my otherwise perfectly mediocre lunch." I thanked them and signed off. I missed hanging out with the whole sick choir, but I wasn't going to see them for at least a few days. That was obvious. If my visit to the Magian Society's landlord didn't take too long and nothing else intervened or tried to kill me, I figured I might be able to consult the sisters that evening. They could tell me things even Fatback couldn't, and about now I was feeling a desperate need for new information. As I threw on my jacket to go out, my phone rang again. It was Monica. "Well, hello, stranger," she said, but if you had licked her tone of voice, your tongue would have been frozen to it until the fire department came to get you off. "I just walked into the Compasses, and the boys said I barely missed you. How's life?" "Yeah, great, sort of." I couldn't avoid it any longer, that was clear. "You have a moment, a minute, to talk?" I could almost hear the lifted eyebrow. "A whole minute," she said. "This is my lucky day." I hoped she was sitting by herself instead of in the middle of the choir. Nothing like a dysfunctional tavern family to make an emotional scene even more embarrassing. "Look, I know I've been kind of distracted lately," I began. "Don't underestimate yourself, Bobby darling. The truth is you've been in utter shit." I opened my mouth to argue, then said, Yeah, you're right." "What is it with you?" Now I could hear how deep the unhappiness went. "We had a crazy night. So what? You think that means I expect us to get married or something? Hello? I'm an immortal just like you are. If anybody understands letting someone have their space, I do. Not to mention that you made your need for that space very clear a long time ago." "I know. That's why I hate cell phones. The door to the outside world was only a few feet away, but it didn't make any difference. I was connected and could not honorably disconnect until the conversation was over. And I was too old for the bad reception, I'm losing you dodge." I sighed. "Honestly, Monica, honey, things really have been complicated, with demons trying to murder me and all. But basically, you're right. I did a terrible job. I actually had a nice time with you that night and the next morning, too. But I got in my own way. I even hope we can do it again sometime, but I was afraid you'd take it more seriously than you." Some of the bitterness was gone this time. "Possibly, but not anymore now that I've seen that you're still a prick when you get panicky. And any future neighbor-dollar collaborations will go forward only with that in mind." She took a drink of something swallowed. "Because I don't want to lose you as a friend, Bobby. I really mean that. You've always been an idiot, but you make me laugh." "I don't want to lose you either, Monica. As a friend, I mean, or whatever we are sometimes. So I don't know exactly what we're agreeing, but it's a bargain, right?" "Right. Just try not to be such an asshole." I was still jumpy about everything else, but a little less guilty about Monica as I began my research on who owned the 4442 East Charleston property. This was the kind of legwork I could do myself, which was just as well because the Sollyholes didn't do real-world stuff.
And Fatback wasn't going to be of any use to anyone except the local sows for another 11 hours or so. As I suspected, a quick check of title deeds, county tax records, and other fun stuff confirmed what I had already suspected. The landlord grinder guy gave me was a holding company, just a cutout for the real owner of the property. And that was only the first holding company of several, as it turned out. Somebody had buried the facts pretty deeply, but I'm a curious guy who likes to get answers, so I know my way around a tedious paper trail better than most. An hour of work in the county file dungeons, a few small bribes, and I finally had what I wanted. The identity of the true and ultimate owner of the address listed on Habari's Magian Society business card. It was a bit of an eye-opener. There was still some afternoon remaining, so I headed to the other side of the Palo Alto district to follow up. Not the garden suburbs this time, but the tall and shiny buildings of Page Mill Square along the Camino Real, just a little south of the Stanford campus. In only a couple of short decades, the office towers there had climbed above even the Wells Fargo building and the other proud stalwarts of Jude's old downtown, and the one I was headed toward was one of the tallest of them all, 5 Page Mill, otherwise known as the Vald Credit Building. The most interesting thing was not that a billion-dollar institution like Vald Credit was the ultimate landlord for a little hole-in-the-wall operation like the Magians, but how much trouble someone had taken to hide that fact in a chain of ownership as long as my arm. I mean, I suppose it could have been coincidental. Obviously, a business empire that big must own a lot of stuff. But another thing that made it interesting was that Vald Credit was owned by one guy, and pretty much everyone in San Judas knew about him. It wasn't that Kenneth Vald had become rich in any unusual way. He had made a little money, then used that money to make some more, and so on and so on. He hadn't even done anything particularly awful along the way by billionaire standards, though nobody makes a globe-girdling fortune without stepping on a few toes. No, he was famous precisely because he and his riches were so visible. He was a man who enjoyed being wealthy in the most public possible way. Parties, public exposure, expensive toys, and expensive women. Vald acted like someone who'd made a deal with the devil and was going to enjoy every instant of it until the loan came due. My colleagues and I had been convinced for a long time that there was more than a hint of sulfur to Vald's resume. Of course, one of the things about powerful people like Ken Vald is that you don't just waltz in and get an appointment to see them. In fact, I wasn't going to get an appointment no matter what I did. At least not as long as I went about it the ordinary way. So I wasn't going to bother with the ordinary. Yes, the whole thing was probably stupid from the start. I should have gone back and done a full-scale prep on Vald before I went anywhere near the place. That was what I had been taught, and if I'd sent that along with a full report to heaven, it might even have got me off the hook with my superiors. But right that moment, I was curious enough to cut some corners, and nervous enough about my current dangerous situation not to care if it was kind of stupid. Plus, there was also the buzz of being onto something. It seemed pretty damn significant that the Edward Walker case, which had put all of heaven and hell in an uproar, should be connected, however remotely, to the office of such a very wealthy and seemingly arrogant man. Actually, that was another reason not to just walk in, now that I think about it. A little rain was falling when I left my car in a restaurant parking lot. By the way, I'm going to go just a minute or two past the top of the hour. A little rain was falling when I left my car in a restaurant parking lot across the Camino Real from Page Mill Square. I knew that the underground parking lot shared by the buildings around the square could be locked down with a single call, and I didn't want to be stuck in there if I pissed anyone off, because I was already guessing I might piss someone off before the afternoon was over. I just didn't know yet how many or how badly. A lot of both, as it turned out. Actually, that's a good place to stop, now that I think about it, because after this begins the action sequence that leads us back along the tail of the snake to the mouth of the snake where the story started. which is Bobby making his way into 5-page mill. So I am going to stop at that point. So apologies if, or maybe you're grateful to hear that I'm not going to read past the top of the hour. But it is the top of the hour. So with that said, here, let me just mark this. Where did it go? There it is. Okay, I have marked it. So with that, I am going to wrap it up for this week. As always, I vastly appreciate you joining me and hanging out. I will be back again, barring fire, flood, acts of God, either fictional or real. I will be back reading next week, same time as usual. Nothing out of the ordinary there. I will have perhaps more tales to tell you, hopefully tales of canine amity, of goodwill among dogs. God bless us, everyone, etc., etc. Excuse me. I hope that is the case, but either way, I will report as to what is going on. And I look forward to seeing all of you. So please do join me then. Until that time, until that moment, whenever we may next meet, please take good care of yourselves. Please, you are important. Take good care of your friends, loved ones, your closest folks, but also keep an eye out for others too, because there are a lot of people out there in the world hurting. And at the very least, we can all be civil with each other, even nice. To those who need it and deserve it. And you can't always tell who needs it and deserves it. Sometimes you have to keep your eyes open and look around a bit. So anyway, with that said, I also add peace, and I wish you all the very best of the next week. You have my thanks, and you have love from our house to you, and I will see you all very soon. Ciao, bambini.